Prova. be right here, so you can start easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everything's fine. Do you have any animation for that?
No, that was keep it. Because at one point I thought they were you can
Great, thank you. I'm gonna just quickly copy it to my own drive as well. Just so.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And I'm going to, I'll because it's on the Google Drive. When I finish, I'll tweet it out anyway. So I'll share it.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go grab a coffee.
Do they have coffee already? Yeah, I think they only start after the session. They only start serving coffee after the session.
Yeah, they did. Do you want a glass of water there, or you go?
No, I'm fine, thank you. Just remind me to give back the USB. Can I just
Yeah.
And here you go, before we forget.
Yeah, look, that's terrible. Left them all around the world.
Oh, I just left my phone at the registration. That's for like 10 minutes. So. Just one person hasn't shown up yet. I'm waiting for Anthony.
I know.
Now we have the
Always. Okay.
I want something to be perfect.
I know. No way. No thinking about it.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
I do.
And I need someone.
I missed Florence at the hotel and he took me up the athletic route.
Oh my, I'm sorry. My father is terrible in athletics and he always wants everyone to walk more.
Do you have a stick?
Yes. There you go. I don't know which side you have the USBs on. Do you have any animations on it?
Only the most basic.
Yeah, okay. That should be good then. Just on the root is fine. You don't need to put it in anything.
Yep, that should be done. What's the microphone?
So we have this microphone working, that's microphone working, and if you want to run around and just walk and everything, we have
sitting down at the table, I'm not comfortable, so I'll take this one.
We have this, and you have to first turn it on by pressing it on.
Okay, and I assume there's a clicker as well, yes?
I don't know, I have not done anything with that yet. Megfuttatod, panaszkodott rád.
Hello, please be you. You have a favorite day?
Yes.
So I was telling them the others that I will make a free
Okay. Do we have a clicker?
Do we have a clicker? Yes. Do we have a clicker?
I have not seen one yet, so. So the slide will be in the middle here.
Okay.
So this is Alan Tate's, this is Timu's. Yours is the third one.
Okay.
So that they are in order, just
It's better like this, I think, because I'm not going to have any.
So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of Eden Annual Conference. We start with a very impressive keynote session. We have with us Professor Alan Tate. We all know him. He was former Eden president and NAP steering committee chair. And I'm very, honored to play that position after you. It's really, it's really difficult, being NAP chair as well at the moment. And of course, Eden Senior Fellow. Alan is currently Director of International Development and Teacher Education at the Open University, United Kingdom. Then we have Teemu Leinonen, Professor of New Media Design and Learning at Aalto University School of Arts, Design and Architecture in Finland. And we have Anthony Camilleri, Policy Consultant, Senior Partner, and CFO, Knowledge Innovation Center in Malta. And, of course, last but not least, Joe Wilson from the Association for Learning Technology, UK Ambassador and OER 2018. Joe is currently Head of Centre Technical and Vocational Education at City of Glasgow College. Thank you all for being here. We are going to start our keynote session immediately after our rapporteur, Claudio Dondi, presents, introduces, describes his reflections on the conference so far. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It will be short. I don't want to introduce too much time between you and the keynotes of this morning. I couldn't attend all the session, obviously, also because I was blocked in the policy one yesterday morning. But I would invite all of you, when you see me in the coffee breaks or at lunch break, to approach the session coordinator to report a few points in order that tomorrow, when I will really do the conference report, I have all the important elements. Just a few points for today from the first day. Several interventions I listened were giving an idea of growing maturity in the use of technology in education, particularly in the higher education sector. They were even mentioning that we can be happy to be now mainstream. I was a little bit surprised of this because having lived for 4 years out of this community, but still in the education community, I still experienced a lot of, how to say, lack of confidence, if not aggressivity, in the higher education world towards the systematic use of technology to deliver education. And we were, yesterday in the fellow session, there was a discussion that was brought by Morton about open universities becoming less flexible and conventional university becoming more flexible. The first effect, in principle, could be induced by the quality assurance and accreditation mechanisms. So this is a reflection to do. If you say we are mainstream, but the quality assurance and accreditation system are just beginning to consider e-learning, technology-based learning as part of the normal provision, there is still something to be done, and we shouldn't give for one a battle that, in my view, is still at the beginning in spite of more than 20 years of experience. My job is to bring what I listen into the scenario of the challenges at the different levels. Yesterday I heard something about demography, the aging of society, the reconceptualization of lifelong learning. I heard something about new ways to certify learning achievements, and I'm sure that today we will go on this issue. And we faced in the policy debate the issue of equity and inclusion, how much technology is really helping to make society more equal and not more unequal. And finally, we had one conclusion in the policy debate that I would like to report here because it's very relevant to the Eden community, and is the issue of proposing new forms of policy dialogue at European level in which the Commission is not dealing once with member states, the other times with the stakeholders, but a policy dialogue platform is involving everybody. And multiplier projects that resemble a little bit the idea of the synergy session that Eden is proposing are set up in the new programmation period. And here I see an important role for Eden as an activator of this different category of projects that follow up the successful pilot projects and create a platform for continuity and upscaling. That's all for now. So have a good session, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudio. So we're going to introduce the first keynote speech by Professor Alan Tate, Open Universities, the Need for Innovation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and good morning to colleagues. Thank you to Eden for the invitation to speak here, and in particular our President, Arina Volungeviciene. Let me give you an abstract of what I want to say this morning, which is to ask with you to get you to reflect on whether the Open University model was one for the last 50 years, but is threatened for the next 50 years. I want to do what a good social scientist should do, which is to make the familiar unfamiliar. So I want us to look critically at these great innovative institutions. I want to look, in Eden's terms, at the meso level, the institutional level, and to ask whether they can sustain their reputation for innovation for the future. We have some 8, perhaps 9, it depends what you count, open universities in Europe. At least 3 of those have been or are threatened existentially over the last 10 years. We have some 60 open universities around the world, and some of those are also equally threatened. So my question arises, of course, all these open universities are in their own local context with their own local histories. There are specific reasons for their challenges. But is there something bigger, is there something more important about the open university model, which leads us to say it needs to change radically? So that's the theme that I want to share with you. 1969 was a very good year, of course. We went to the moon, we founded the first open university. So what gave the open universities the basis for their very strong achievement? Let nobody have any doubts about how great the achievement was. They have what you could call first mover advantage from the 1970s. They were truly innovative institutions. Firstly, they were innovative in their vision and their mission. They said they wanted to do something very different from other universities. They wanted to include new kinds of people, people who had never been to university before, whose families did not expect their children to go to university before. They had an enormous amount of innovation in learning and teaching, exactly because they included new kinds of people, adult students, part-time students, people in work, people in prison, people with children, etc., etc. So they had to innovate in the way that they organized their learning and teaching, and they had to think about learning and teaching seriously. I think open universities can claim to be the first universities that seriously thought about learning and teaching. They were the first to introduce technologies into their teaching methods. This was regarded 50 years ago with enormous skepticism. It was regarded as a ridiculous notion. The open universities can claim to have pioneered that. They pioneered what I can call educational logistics, that is the organization of services on time at high quality. I think open universities can claim a very strong role in that. They pioneered scale. In their time, they were the biggest universities. They had ambitions about size and scale, which were very new and very different. And they had embedded innovation in the way they did things. They talked about doing things in new ways for the first time. So these, I think, were the basis for the first mover advantages for open universities. But I would argue, and this is something I would like to suggest we all think about, those first mover advantages have been very substantially eroded. They do not provide the basis for open university reputations today. What happens on campus in many, many countries is not what it was 20 years ago. Many campuses now offer what we can in effect call blended learning programs. They offer technology embedded in what are promoted as campus-based teaching. Many, many students in campus-based programs engage with learning management systems. They talk to their teachers and they talk to each other online. We also have new institutions, new entrants with online programs only. Institutions that were never involved with what you can call second generation distance education. We have one or two open universities like that ourselves, but the majority were formed in the second generation distance education world. We've had the innovation with MOOCs. Now, I'm not one of those who thinks either that MOOCs are the answer to everything, certainly not, but nor do I fall into the group that thinks that MOOCs are irrelevant. I think they're a very, very important phenomenon, and they did not come from the open universities. They came from the big, rich, research-based universities, and indeed open universities were initially extremely offended about the MOOC phenomenon, and I think it was because we thought we owned innovation. We thought we did this sort of thing. And here we find places like MIT and Stanford exciting the world by new technology-supported teaching. The digital revolution has brought technology onto almost all campuses, I would say. So that part of the open university reputation, that part of our first mover advantage has been significantly eroded. But equally, the open universities, I would say, have won the argument about mass participation in higher education. This was a very difficult argument 50 years ago. People were frankly incredulous. Why would these sorts of people need to go to university? Why would a society want to support these sorts of people in universities? Well, we won that argument. But of course, that leaves us with a vision that is now widely shared, which is not by any means unique to open universities. So there are something like 60 open universities around the world today. In the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth in the sense of the former British Commonwealth, there's something like 4.5 million learners. It's difficult to know the numbers, something like 8 million students in open universities today. After Europe, which is a very significant place for open universities, Asia has the biggest number. It's interesting to note in passing that there are some very important countries which do not have an open university. Some very important modern countries like France, Australia, Russia, the USA. None of these have an open university, yet they all have mass higher education systems. So an open university is not an essential element in a national higher education system. And of course, there are many other what have been called mega universities with 100,000 students or more, not open universities at all. So scale has been achieved in other ways than having an open university. So I did some research last year with open university rectors or presidents or vice chancellors as to what they thought the state of play for innovation in their institutions was. And I asked them about context, about what they thought about their strategic directions, and what they thought the state of play was with innovation and technology in their institutions. And these were the sorts of answers I got back from them. They noticed, in terms of challenges in particular, that other universities had entered their field. Other universities had become more flexible. Other universities were offering part-time programs. They noted as a danger to them that there were online universities which were new entrants in the field, which threatened the ownership of that field by the open universities. But they noted that they had, and perhaps I can say they still had, reputation and brand challenges. In many parts of the world, I'm sorry to tell you, open universities are not equated with the term high quality. I think that is less a problem in Europe. I think in Europe there is a widespread acceptance that open universities offer quality, even if quality is, and indeed it should be, a contested term. But in many parts of the world that is not the case. And they noted what continues to be, in many places, low levels of student completion and qualification, and governments asking very difficult questions. In many parts of the world, we give you this money to provide higher education, but so few people finish in open universities. And governments asking with a sense of urgency, is this a good use of our money when so few people finish with qualifications? So these were the challenges which vice chancellors and rectors had. So a small number of institutions continued in the world of the 1970s, but they were a small number. The government regarded them as the National Distance Education University. Other universities are not allowed to do distance or online learning. Other universities in some countries remain completely uninterested in part-time students, in adult students, or in online and distance learning. So for some universities, even in the year 2018, it is like 1970. The environment has not changed. But even the rectors of those small number of universities did not believe this would last. So this changed environment for open universities, which I would regard as a threatening environment, is expected, I think, all around the world. A major problem for open universities, at least those that were born before the digital revolution, has been the movement from second-generation distance education into the digital age. Almost all the rectors I talked to knew the term learning analytics, but it was really talking about promise, not achievement. Only a small minority of open universities have themselves produced MOOCs. You might regard that as strange, but my research showed that that was the case. MOOCs are being created elsewhere. Only one open university I talked to had a major commitment to use OERs, open education resources, in their own course production. Most of them were still in the world that we produce the courses with the content, with the knowledge for our students. The one open university I found which used open education resources was very interesting because they would not allow a new course to be produced without the academics creating that course having searched the world for materials that could go into their course. And they had evidence that this significantly reduced cost and time in producing courses where that happened. But it was one example only I could find. A number of open universities are closing their regional centres, so to better or worse effect. So they are saying in the digital world, we do not want this commitment to geography that we had in the pre-digital world. And a number of them reported continuing resistance to change by the academic staff. It was a minority of open universities, but still you might find it strange in an open university dedicated to innovation that there is resistance to the adoption of the online world. Other reforms and innovations they reported, I will leave you to look through perhaps the most important of them. Some open universities are certainly introducing the assessment of prior learning. You might be surprised it's not all, but it is not all. Some are linking up with the question of refugees, which is such a challenging problem for so many of us. I think very interestingly, changes in the way that students are supported. are being adopted in a number of places, a significant number of places, with more flexible systems and with e-tutors available not quite 24/7 in most places, but on a much more flexible basis than before, providing more personalized learning. But strangely to me, only one of the vice-chancellors or rectors I talked to mentioned dropout as a priority. So here we are with a widespread acceptance that student completion is a problem, yet for only one open university I talked to was it an institutional priority. I just bring this to your attention. There's been a recent report on open universities in the Commonwealth, if you're interested in it. It's a very neutral report. It doesn't offer any criticism. At least the closest it comes to are what you see I can put in the quotation marks at the bottom. The report notes that low output rates suggest many open universities struggle with attrition. So in as much as you can get the data on student completion, and actually it's very difficult to get, these are not transparent or open systems at all, in as much as you can get the data, it looks to be widely true that low output rates show a struggle with student completion. And I think this is a lovely bit of bureaucratic text. The lack of conscious efforts to relate missions to outcomes. In other words, open university mission statements announce lots of wonderful intentions, but when you look for programs of activity in the open universities to deliver on those missions, they are not there. So in other words, we have a level of rhetoric in open university mission with very little attention to as to how to achieve those goals. So just moving into the last part of my speech, we have a huge task ahead of us with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in particular in continents like Latin America and Asia, where we want to move from something like 250 million people in universities in this year to by 2030, 400 million. So an enormous question of expansion of opportunity over the next less than 15 years. What's absolutely clear, and what I hope UNESCO will be persuaded of, is that this cannot be done by building campuses alone. Open, distance, flexible, online systems are going to have to be an essential part of the movement in middle income countries from elite to mass higher education systems. But in my view, the question I want to suggest to you is, do we have the confidence that open universities are the core vehicles for this movement, for this contribution to the UN Sustainable Development Goals? If I am right, and that there are critical questions to be asked about the achievement of open universities over the last 50 years, are we confident that open universities are in the key position which you might expect to be the lead institutions to help the world achieve these Sustainable Development Goals? So it leads me to a question which I hope we have a little time for discussion of. How do we reinvent open universities for the next period? Because I hope I've done enough to persuade you that this is a core and an urgent task. And if this task is not addressed, in my view, the part in the natural landscape that we assume for open universities will not, in fact, come to pass. The open university model risks becoming a model for the 1980s, not a model for the next 25 or 50 years. Priorities for change, in my opinion, lie in these four bottom bullet points here. I think open universities need to understand their world. Too often I found open universities lived in their own bubble. Often because they are unusual institutions, they talk only amongst themselves and they don't look closely enough at a changing environment. Open universities need to address the quality agenda. The quality agenda is contested. All too often in the UK, I turn on the BBC radio and somebody says, so we consulted the best British universities. And you know immediately who they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about the big research-based universities, which are automatically assumed to be the best. But actually there are different versions of best in higher education, and what open universities have achieved in bringing new kinds of learners into higher education and taking them somewhere they never expected to go, that is another sort of best. So I think open universities will need to be much more assertive in challenging how the quality agenda is constructed. Open universities need to engage with the digital revolution in the most effective ways. They need to do it on a whole institutional basis. It is surprising, I think, that open universities have been so slow in doing this. And I also think that open universities need to address on the curriculum side the issues of sustainability in all programs of study, not just in environmental studies. The whole thrust of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is about sustainability of this world for humanity and other species. Sustainability as a concept is relevant in all curriculum areas, in the humanities, in engineering, in business studies, across the whole field. And I believe that is a real space for innovation which open universities could step into. So, to finish, Madam President, you'll be pleased to know, let me leave you with this, with my analysis of where open universities are, done on a SWOT basis. I'll leave you to read that and engage with that for a second. I think there's a lot to hope for from open universities, but I believe that the time for change is upon us, and I think that challenge is urgent. I don't think open universities can assume the future will be the same as the past for their institutional missions. And can I just say in conclusion that most of what I've said is currently in an article in the Asian Association of Open Universities, the Journal of the Asian Association of Open Universities, and I'm also editing with my colleague Ross Poole a special issue with contributions from all around the world in the International Research Review of Open and Distance Learning, ERODL, which will appear in January 2019 on this very topic of the future of open universities, ? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alan, his keynote speech. While I introduce you, now we have Teemu Leinonen, as I said, Professor of New Media Design and Learning at Aalto University School of Arts, Design and Architecture, and his contribution is entitled From Known and Informal Learning to Documented Co-Learning. The floor.
Look at the presentation. Present view. Is this the one? Yeah. So can I see this? Okay. Seems to be. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the aid and to invite me over here. It's a great honor to be here. To be honest, I've been around for the EDEN conferences for many years. I think first time in Rome, long time ago, and coming back and forth several times, and I highly appreciate the community, and especially that it's a pan-European initiative. I think you are doing a good job. I thought to try to open up a bit of my and my research group latest research, which is closely related to this intersection between formal, non-formal and informal learning, which of course you all are familiar with the tradition and those concepts, and how we are moving in my research and in my group to something we may call it documented co-learning. But before getting into that, I want to do a short introduction. Where do I come from and who am I? How many of you have heard about Aalto University? Wow, our communication team is doing a great job. Most of you know the university in Helsinki. It is, how this works? Yep. It's in a way it's a quite new university. It was founded 2010, but it's a merge of 3 leading universities in Helsinki area: the Helsinki University of Technology, University of Art and Design, and Helsinki School of Economics. So by combining these three universities, which is about the history of 100 years each, we got a history of 300 years in one place, which is nothing compared to Genova University, found 1481. But anyway, we end up to be a bit older university by combining these relatively new universities, only history of 100 years together. So 300 years or 8 years of history, you can choose the facts yourself. Anyway, I think it's important to notice that all those three universities were found in a certain era in the history of Finland. Finland got industrialized, there was a need of more science, technology, higher education, but same time there was the project of building a nation, so art and design, architecture was playing a big role in there, and of course we started international trade in that time too, so the School of Economics was serving those purposes. And somewhere around 2000 later, we realized that this model doesn't work anymore. We need to renew the thing again, and we came up with this thing called Aalto University. And you may see that it's the idea of bringing art and science together with engineering, technology, art and design, and business. So these three fields, and we believe that that will produce something interesting and important for the society. We've been having a working name of calling it Innovation University too. Then just a few words about me. I'm an associate professor in the media lab of the Aalto University, which is in the School of Art, Design and Architecture. And my background is such that I started educational or learning sciences in the University of Tampere, and then end up with the internet, with the new media, to become self-learned designer of the web. Then did my degree and PhD on that field as well. And I define myself as a designer and researcher and educator these days, and I lead this little research group. So I thought, which is considered to be a good thing for learning too, that I want to step out of my comfort zone. As you saw and seen already, I'm a serious guy. I'm an academic. I read a lot of boring papers written by you, and I write even more boring, which nobody is reading quite a lot. But I thought that I'd start with a little joke, which is of course related to my talk as well. These are my favorite jokes. And the joke goes that there were two dogs. They were hard-working dogs, not normal dogs. They were having jobs. They went to work every day. And I think Beatles made a song about these dogs as well. And after work, they were having this habit that they went to the bar. So happy hour, they went after a long day at work, they went to the bar and were having a drinks. And again, one day, they were in the bar and they were asking for drinks from the bartender. The bartender was serving them, and they were having two drinks. If they were in Ireland, they were having Guinness. If they were in Northern Germany or Scandinavia, they were having a beer. And if they were in the civilized world, they were having a chipping glass of wine. Anyway, they were enjoying their drinks in there when suddenly something happened. They were happy there, chatting about the long day at work, when the bartender's phone was ringing. And it was this old Nokia phone, of course, as the bartenders are using those. And just when he was reaching the phone, one of the dogs said, "If it's Pavlov, we are not here." Ha, you are laughing. The joke works. Which tells that you did your introduction course to psychology. Why I'm telling this joke and how I try to relate this to my talk today is that they, as I told, they were not ordinary dogs. They were having the ability to reflect and even self-regulate. They were very special dogs in that way. They were having this idea that long day at work and regulate their own habits and things. They wanted to focus on on the joyful event of having a beer. So now we get to the serious stuff as the joke ends, and keep those dogs in your mind when I go on with my serious part of my talk. I decided to categorize this to three things, and my objectives or aim is that I try to make you to think about these three things or these three themes. I will talk about the metamedia and the changing world a bit. Metamedia is something which has been discussed in the field a bit, but I think it's a good time to bring this concept again. So I will define it and then talk about the changing world. I'm sure you all are aware of it, that the world is changing. And the opening keynote yesterday was getting into this too. But I have a few points which I think often we forget. Then I will talk about this formal, non-formal, informal learning very briefly, because I know that you are expert on this. But I see and relate it to this metamedia, what are changes happening in there, and maybe we probably need to redefine and think these concepts and theories and thoughts again. And finally, the main beef of my talk will be the tools for documented co-learning, which are examples of me and my research group working on this field, trying to make prototypes which are reflecting on the changes in these topics. So anyway, the metamedia idea and the changing world, everybody recognizes this. It's the Mosaic web browser from the year 1991, which I think was the changing factor when internet became a thing for all. And that when we saw that this thing is going to change many things. But things didn't happen really fast. We could say that even that this metamedia was around, the real change happened much, much later. And if we look now back, we can define that what are the characteristics of this metamedia which makes it really, really important and different. And I think there are three things. First of all, it's able to imitate all earlier forms of media. You can see YouTube is a bit like a television. Podcasts are like a radio. Things, you have the books, and the hypertext is, of course, newspapers are online and so on. So it imitates all the earlier forms of media, from books to radio to television and so on. The thing that makes it different with this imitation is that you can program it. It runs algorithms. It's not only media, the traditional media you couldn't program the way you can program the metamedia. You can have algorithms in there, you can make tricks and things which were not possible before. And then the third thing which is important from my research point of view too, all these three are important, is that it remembers everything. And it's ubiquitous nowadays. It's always with us, we can always get into it, and it has this memory that the saying that what you put internet will stay in internet is actually true. It will be somewhere always available for people to find afterwards. So just a few statistics. As I say, that early 1990s came the web browser, which was changing or started to change. The real change is more recent. It is from the early 2000s when the mobile smartphone started to take over as a device everybody is having. And these numbers are quite interesting if you look that, and these are from the ITU statistics, that in a way everybody is online all the time nowadays. If we look more closely the broadband on mobile, how it is growing, the numbers are huge. Especially the less developed countries, the growth are now somewhere 60% annually, and the mobile broadband subscriptions in the developed world is close to 100. So this means that we have this metamedia always with us to do things and to stay these metamedia to do things for us. If we look the youth of the world, today we can say that 70% of the world young people are online, and they are online with their mobile phones, which is partly problematic too, because the mobile phone is very limited as a device to get online compared to the laptop or desktop computer. And I think this has a huge impact to informal learning, and that's something we should address and think about. So that was the metamedia. It imitates all existing media. You can program, it runs algorithms, and then it remembers everything. You can get back to those things which been done with the device, and it's always with you these days. Then a few words about the formal, non-formal, informal learning, which we all know the theories from the past, but I want to get into this topic through another story, which is about my daughter. She's Stella. She's 7 years old, and when she was 6 years old, about a year ago, she was not able to read and write in that time, and once at home, I was working again, writing some boring paper in my office, and she came by and told that Dad, let's make ice cream. I want to do Italian ice cream. And I said that, well, I'm actually professor of this new media. I don't know anything about making ice cream. And even that she was not able to read, she was able to use the voice search with the tablet. So after 5 minutes, she came back and said that, hey, I found from YouTube instructions how to make ice cream. And I thought first that, wow, I've seen the future now. She just is learning to make ice cream. And we then were looking the instructions from the YouTube, and we made ice cream. It ended up to be really good, nothing to complain on that. But it made me to think that did she learn something in there? And my first impression was that, I see the future, this is how things will happen. But after thinking this again, reflecting on it, she didn't learn very much. She was able to make, according to the instructions found from the YouTube, with help of me, ice cream, but I would never say that she's able to make Italian ice cream or she has learned to make ice cream. She was following instructions and was performing the task which were given from the YouTube. So it was not really very deep learning in sense of informal learning. And as a dad, I of course was asking her then that is this really something you would go further in your career and become an ice cream maker, and then we discussed that where could you study ice cream making, and was proposing that maybe going to Italy is not a bad idea, to take a school in there and so on. But it was like a eyes opening for me to think about that where the world of learning is becoming or going. And then I want to just memorize you about these definitions of formal and non-formal and informal learning, which probably some of you have been writing about days back. And I think it's something which is now challenging is precisely this, that the informal learning, almost everything with this 70% of the youth being online, and when times go by, all the people of the world, that the informal learning actually happens online. So it happens with internet. We still have the institutions doing the formal learning. We have the non-formal learning sector, the workplace learning, the CLAMs. Who have heard about the GLAM? It stands for galleries, libraries, archives and museums. Actually, the definition is made by people in the Wikipedia community, and I think I love it. It's a nice word too. And then there's the NGOs, of course, whatever from the Boy Scouts to organizations, Amnesty International, Red Cross and so on, who are doing part of the non-formal. But the informal side is more and more things we find purposefully or accidentally online. And I think this is a big change we should consider. If we look the same thing from power and control point of view, of course in formal sector we have the curriculum and degrees. It's something how we control things. In the non-formal, it's a pseudo-voluntary. Your employer is asking you to take a course, or you decide, your parents brings you to library or brings you to NGO to study and learn in there. And then the informal side, which is thought to be voluntary. I add in there or not voluntary, and remember the dogs as well and Pavlov. It might not to be voluntary, even that we think that it is voluntary, the informal side. But still from last big part, you go and you find the instructions how to do ice cream and so on. And then if we look the regulation, and of course with the formal side we have all the directives coming from top down, we have the laws, we have the degree regulations, and that's how we regulate the formal side. Then if we look the non-formal side, there's the sociocultural context. Your parents will bring you, consider things to be valuable, or your workplace consider certain things to be valuable, and they will bring you or provide you learning opportunities, these non-formal learning opportunities. But if we look at the informal side now, and please keep in mind that all the rest and more on internet, what is required is self-regulation. We need to decide on our time. How do we spend it? Do we watch a Netflix or movie from there, or do we study important or interesting things for ourselves? So I'm running out of time, but I will skip through these. So I think traditionally we've been thinking that from the formal we lead people to the non-formal and informal. There are also, of course, loops. Oops, it went a bit fast, which means that those formal things will then lead to self-regulation and how do we choose things. And this is the idea we have why we still put children to the schools and we attend to the universities, that will lead to certain things. And that's precisely what we have done with some of the tools which we've been working on to bring this informal learning to the formal sector and guide people from the formal to the meaningful informal learning. So just a few words before I get to the actual tools. I want to say very clearly a pedagogical statement how I approach to pedagogy. I think we need to focus to the learners, that learners are in the center of the things. We should let them to behave like experts. And this is just a word of warning, because what I will tell you now may be a bit scary, because there are these technology megatrends which makes possible certain things. And I want to emphasize, I don't come from the NSA, from the National Security Agency in the United States, so I'm not going to spy you or your children. I come from Finland, very small country between West and East, so I don't have any interest on that. But these are the technology megatrends which are related to this metamedia thing as well. And this leads to certain learning megatrends. As I say, the formal-informal learning relationship is interesting. We need these social environments which are partly online, partly offline, campus and so on. And then there's the analytics, self-regulation learning and reflection, which I think are really, really interesting related to these technology megatrends. But the warning what I made comes now, that if we put these to the matrix, we look for what kind of research or what kind of things are happening in here, and we simply replace the technology with the big data warehouse, and what we can track out of these formal, informal learning, social environments, and get analytics for self-regulated learning and reflection, is that we can record all the communication happening with this metamedia. We can track the locations and moves of people, and we can record all the audio-video communications as well, what people have online. And when we add to this a bit of software, we get quite interesting things. We get, of course, statistics and voice-to-text analytics, face and voice recognition, which may end up to sentiment analytics and emotion tracking. And now we come to my beef. We get something which is documented goal learning. And as I said, I'm really in to think how this will help the students to reflect and self-regulate their own learning, not anybody spying anyone for some other purposes. We may also call it that this is automated learning portfolios or automated patches or decrees coming out of this system. And then the 3 prototypes, very briefly, which we've been building on. These are called AHSO. It's available in app stores. It was made for construction field students to document their good learning experiences. So they have this when they are doing workplace learning. They record things when they found something in a construction site that it was very well made or there's a mistake. And what they can do, they can annotate things by pointing out things in the video screen and writing little descriptions. There's no any metadata you need to fill up. All the metadata comes automatically, like the location, who was the worker who made the documentation, as well the text annotations will make it searchable. So I can search door or bathroom, and I get from the video database all those videos which discuss about building a bathroom, for instance. Another example, which was from the same research, European research called Learning Layers. We made another app which was called SOAR, Social Augmented Reality, which is a thing also, video conference thing, where you can point things and then draw on top of the video. So you don't use your face camera, you use the other camera, and then you draw on top of that things you want to explain. And similar way, everything is recorded, and you can look those afterwards, and the metadata is in there. And the last example is Fishbowl video conference, which we've been now testing. It's a little video conference room where you can add 40 people, and there's 4 people discussing same time. And if you want to join the panel, you need to press the button. When people who are in the panel will get a message, leave the panel. So one of those people in there must go to the audience, and another person will come in there. And what we are doing with this and all these 3 is that we track everything, what I mentioned earlier in this picture, which is my last picture. Maybe this is a better one. So with all these 3 tools, we get all the communication recorded, we get the locations and moves tracking, audio video recordings, and we get all that kind of stuff with the statistics to serve the learners, to make them have documented goal learning, automated portfolio, patches and decrees, maybe one day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. In the end, we'll have a brief discussion. Please, Anthony. So now we have Anthony Camilleri, Policy Consultant, Senior Partner NSFO, Knowledge Innovation Center, Malta. And his contribution is entitled Beyond the Hive, a Blockchain Perspective to Educational Management. Please, the floor to you. You can, yes.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Eden, for having me here. Quick question to get an idea of the room. How many people here have heard about blockchain? Okay. How many of you own Bitcoin? 1 or 2 in the front. How many of you at the moment think that blockchain has any application to education whatsoever? Okay, so I have some convincing to do. So Blockchain has been in the news a lot, and before we get into it, it would be a good thing to understand what exactly blockchain is. This does not work. Okay, so simply enough, blockchain is a digital way for people to transfer assets directly between each other without an intermediary. That's your simple dictionary definition of it. And the other thing you need to know about blockchain is that blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin. So one of the first things you need to get out of your head is that blockchain and Bitcoin are the same thing. So Bitcoin is the thing you're hearing about on the news. It's the one with the rapid price fluctuations. It's the one that's used for underground drug deals and all those other things. Blockchain is the technology that makes it possible. And what all this means is that blockchain is effectively a public decentralized ledger. A ledger is just a special kind of database that stores the time of a transaction and who transferred which asset to who. It might sound like something extremely simple until you start understanding that the invention of this kind of database back in binded books is called the founding technology for capitalism. So simply enough, this database, this ledger, this ability to write in a time-stamped way who is transferring what to who, is what makes the transfer, accumulation of assets possible, and what makes capitalism and the entire society we live in today possible from a technological perspective. So if we even mess with this technology a little bit, it can have profound impacts on anything that uses this technology. And because pretty much everything in our society does use this technology, it starts having a gigantic multiplier effect. So to understand what blockchain does to mess with it, we need to understand how a modern database works. And whatever the database, whatever the context, essentially, users store their information in that database. The thing is, for any large database, a user does not typically put it directly in the database themselves. They go through some kind of intermediary. There is a person that controls the database. In the old days, that would be a public registry that stored the books. Today, it's the person or the organization that controls the computer which that database is on. So actually, when you write to the database, the person who controls the database gives you permission to write into that database. And every other person who wants to access that information also asks for permission to access that database. And simply enough, that is a model that can be abused. Because effectively, the person who controls the database has all the power over it. And you all know the maxim, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what different ways are there for this centralized data to be abused? First of all, the person who runs the database can change the rules for writing or reading to that database. They can restrict access to certain individuals. They can delete parts of the database. They can misuse it. They can revalue it. So apart from that then, you have the external bad actors. You have all your data in one place, and it can be hacked, it can be changed, it can be bombed, it can be deleted. And all of you have been hearing all kinds of stories about data theft in the news, about misuse of data in the news, and so on and so forth. But even when all of this is used properly, and when all of this works perfectly, there's still quite a bit of abuse that can happen. Take credit card networks, for example. All Visa or MasterCard or any of the other credit companies do is effectively keep a very simple ledger. Every time you swipe your credit card, they record one line in the database saying that X amount of money has been taken out of your account and put into the shop's account. To write that one line in the database, they charge approximately 3% of the transaction to write a few bytes of code. But because they're the centralized authority and they can do this reliably every single time, they are able to put this kind of tax on transactions. And here's where we come to the blockchain. This whole set of problems that I have been describing that comes from centralized ledgers, blockchain was designed to solve. So blockchain is designed as a decentralized database without that intermediary. The way blockchain does this is actually quite simple. What it effectively does is, instead of saying there will be one central copy of the database, which everybody refers to, instead it says, every person who uses the database shall keep a complete copy of that database on their own machine. So instead of asking for permission, pinging a central server, and the transaction coming back, you do the transaction directly with the database on your machine. That transaction then goes out to the entire network of people who are running it. It's verified by the entire network of people, and once it's been verified by the entire network through a process called consensus, it is then added to the ledger. What this means is, if I'm a bad actor that tries to change a part of that, I can't, because I would have to hack more than 50% of the computers in the network to actually make a change that would stay. What it means is that I can't on my own control it, because I need a 50% plus 1 vote from the network for the transaction to be approved. So effectively, it is a mechanism for democracy in a database. Now, this is the feature of blockchain we call decentralization. So decentralization simply means removal of that central party that controls the entire process. But it also has a couple of other important features. First of all, blockchains are transparent. So all the information that is stored on the blockchain is available to all the parties that participate in the blockchain at the same time. Because I have a copy of the entire database, I can also view the entire database. It's a tool for open data in this sense. And then there's this last one, and this is the big one. Blockchains are immutable. And what immutable means is that a transaction cannot be deleted, and it cannot be edited. It is mathematically impossible, or technically I should say mathematically improbable to the point of being impossible, to edit a blockchain. Once a transaction is put there, it can mathematically, provably be left unchanged. So it is a database which you can only do one kind of function to. You can only add new transactions to it. Once it's there forever, as long as at least one person is running a copy of that blockchain software. So, that's the quick intro to blockchain. But what does all of this have to do with education? And here's the thing. It all comes back to, what do you store in that ledger? What do you store in that special kind of database? And there are 3 different kinds of things you can store in a ledger. First of all is asset transactions. Second is what we call notarized certificates. And thirdly is a rather new thing called smart contracts. And I'll lead you through each of these and the potential applications. So starting with asset transactions. This one is the one you're probably most familiar with. A ledger was built as a tool for finance to transfer financial type assets, stocks, bonds, currency, property, and so on. Now, generally speaking, this doesn't have a massive impact on education, but because it was the first use of Bitcoin, it was also the first application for education. And as a matter of fact, you do find a number of universities that are now accepting Bitcoin as payment. The date's a little small there, but although people think of Bitcoin as a new thing, this is an article from 2013. So it's already been going away, and this was essentially the first very, very simple application. But even this can make a massive difference. Because if you think about the number of people who are unbanked in the world, the number of people who don't have access to a bank account in normal places, and who do have access to cryptocurrency accounts, then you can already see that just through a simple thing as accepting cryptocurrency and avoiding the centralized network of banks, you already can have a bit of an impact. But to get to the more interesting stuff, let's talk about notarized certificates. Now, to understand notarized certificates, I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you a little bit more tech. And the concept you need to understand here is something called a cryptographic hash function. Now, put simply, every digital document in the world, I don't care if it's a scan of a PDF or a computer program or an image, has a unique digital identifier. If I take the same code and run it through a hash generator, it will give me a hash which looks exactly like what you see in the diagram. If I put in a 500-page document, I will still get a 256-bit hash. If I put in one sentence, I'll get a 256-bit hash. The important thing you need to know, though, is first that the same document will always give the same hash when run through a hash generator. Secondly, if I change a single byte in that hash, it will give a single byte in that document, it will give a completely different hash. And thirdly, if the only piece of information I have is a hash, it is mathematically impossible, and here not improbable, but impossible, to generate the original document from it. Just the same as if the only piece of information I have about you is your ID card number, I cannot know who you are if the only piece of information I have is an ID card number. I would need a database saying that this ID card number is linked to this person. So when we talk about notarized digital signatures, they're actually a really, really simple concept. You take any digital document at the time it was issued, you run it through a hash generator, and then you store that hash on a blockchain. So you've stored the method of identifying that specific document in a public, unhackable, undeletable ledger. If 20 years later I want to prove that that document is real, even if it's an editable Word document, all I have to do is run the document through the hash generator, and if the hash matches the one that's on the chain, I can irrefutably prove that that is real. So what you end up with is a way to create automatically verifiable credentials without the need for a third party. And as you might imagine, automatically verifiable credentials are something that is very, very interesting in education. Because at the moment, most institutions will give you a credential, you will use it for various purposes in life, but every time you come to an employer or to another institution, that credential needs to be verified. And how does that verification happen? Either through exhaustive checks of the physical security of the credential, or by asking the institution to issue a new original, or through exhaustive checks with the original institution. It's extremely time laborious, it's extremely expensive. Essentially, when you move these to the blockchain, you are effectively given a credential that you hold yourself, and that any person you give it to, or any person you share it to, can just click a button and know that that is an authentic credential. Now again, this isn't particularly new technology anymore. Even though blockchain has only been around for 4 or 5 years since its start, there are already several companies that are working inside of this. I've put an open and a closed one on board. So on the left, you have Sony that is integrating it into the Sony Global Education Platform. On the right is BlockCerts that is linked to MIT and being promoted as an open standard. BlockCerts is being implemented, for example, by the government of Malta in national level pilots. You also have other companies such as GradBase, such as Accredible. So at the moment, there are a number of companies that are already rushing into creating these automatically recognized blockchain type certificates. Let's take a look though into what else you can do. Now this same type of certificates can be used for other things. So first of all, verifying and accrediting institutions. Simply enough, the certificate offered for accreditation can also be verified. And also registering and tracking of IP. Now the last bit I want to get into is smart contracts. Now smart contracts is where we get to the really, really cool stuff you can do with blockchain, but it's also the really, really experimental stuff. So everything I'm going to present here is in extremely early stages, and even though companies are promoting it, they're usually raising funds to build a prototype. So the concept of a smart contract is simply enough that instead of storing an asset or a digital certificate, I store the entire code of a computer program directly on the chain. And what that means is, once I've put the computer program on the chain, that computer program can't be changed. And it becomes self-executing. What does self-executing mean? It means it becomes like a law of physics. Just the same as every time water hits 100 degrees, it will turn into steam, no matter what happens. Once a smart contract is put on the blockchain, when the trigger happens, that contract will execute and cannot be stopped. So, in a smart contract, you can code democracy. So you can basically say that this contract will execute when a certain number of votes from stakeholders are received. Voting is directly linked to an action, not to a proposal. So as soon as the number of votes is received, the math just executes and that happens. Contracts can be changed, but only if you have a democratic vote to do so, and everyone has full visibility into each step. So what can you do with these kinds of smart contracts? One thing you can do is create performance-based incentives. When you reach X performance indicator, doesn't matter if it's number of publications or X student rating or so on, X amount of money will be released. Once it's created, as soon as you reach it, no committee deciding, no administrative procedure, it just happens. Another example, you could automate credit transfer. Imagine coding Erasmus agreements when they're signed into the chain. And then, once the Erasmus agreement has been coded, you can't change your mind afterwards and say, we changed our mind, we won't recognize those credits after all. Imagine automating administration entirely. This is, by the way, Wolf University. That is a bunch of Oxbridge scholars that are actually raising funds to try and do this. And they aim to automate every single administrative process in a university with time. But basically, putting every committee and every set of votes on the blockchain. And imagine if you go big and you say, decentralize entire computer programs. Let's not use Google Docs in the Google Cloud anymore. Let's run a decentralized one where nobody has control. And by the way, this isn't a dream. You can go to graphiteapp.com and it's already running in a simple way. So the point I'd like to get to you is that in the long term, blockchain has the potential not just to disrupt the execution of every single process that uses a database, but also the governance of those processes. Because it's a technology that deals with governance and with execution. One more thing I'd like to highlight is blockchain is still emerging tech. How emerging? I would say about this emerging. It is at its very, very infancy. We're still barely scratching the surface of what we could do with it. So people who tell you blockchain is going to change the world might be right, and I stress might, but probably we're looking on the timescales it took to get from that computer to a laptop, and not necessarily within the next 6 months. That said, just the same as education was very involved there, control of data and these concepts I've been talking about are not abstract. Control of data affects everyone's life in very real terms. So what I'd like to leave you with as an idea, and why you should look into it as educators, is that everything we have done in education, or rather everything we have done in tech till today, involved the Faustian bargain. You get more convenience and you get more connectivity, but you do that at the price of less privacy and less ownership. And it had to work like that, because that's the way the tech worked. The big, or the little big change of blockchain is we change around the arrow. We can have it all. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks to you. And now we have Joe Wilson. Yeah. Joe Wilson from the Association for Learning Technology, UK Ambassador at OER 2018. He will present a contribution on open education in policy and practice, a UK perspective. Thank you, Joe.
Is this the right one? Is it on? Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah?
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be invited to come, and actually a great pleasure to be in Genoa. As a Glaswegian, as you can hear probably from my accent, Glasgow's a great shipping city too, or was, and it's just great to see a city on the water. I've been fascinated just wandering around. I'm really here to talk about the Association for Learning Technology and all the things that we're up to in the UK, and really looking at ways that we can reach out to Eden and you, and to see how we can work together. You'll find out a bit more about me too as I chat through all the things that we're getting up to in Alt. And I'm also going to talk about the macro, meso and micro. So the Association of Learning Technology. The Association for Learning Technology is unashamedly, it's the gang hut for people who really work under the bonnet, the learning technologists, the people that make all of the systems work for us and for learners. What we try and do is drive policy change at national and institutional level. We try and share experiences with all of our colleagues who are all struggling to try and make all of the systems work for learners. I'll talk to you a wee bit about what it's like being in a college and making all the systems work for learners. There's an enormous amount of change coming all of the time. I'm having to reskill myself and my staff. I'm having to reskill my staff almost every year, but actually it's a continual process as we work out the plugins or the different ways of doing collaborative video conferencing or whatever the next thing that the system needs. And the only way we can cope with it is if we all work collectively together. And that really depends on a range of specialist interest groups. So we're about disseminating expertise, openly publishing all of our research, and around supporting special interest groups. Unsurprisingly, probably the biggest special interest group we've got just now is all around open practice and open learning. And as I go through this, you'll find out more about me. In 2012, I co-founded something called Open Scotland, and we wrote the Open Scotland Declaration, which we asked institutions in Scotland to sign up for. And it was really just that commitment to use, got my t-shirt on, to use Creative Commons licensing and to open up learning materials, really for the good of all. Alt has taken this work that we've done in Scotland and helped refocus it on the Whitehall government. So in the UK, the education system is actually divided up among the home countries. So if we want to change education policy, we have to go to our own parliament. So in Scotland, that's in Edinburgh at Holyrood, and in England, it's Westminster and Whitehall. And Alt is playing an important and significant role in driving forward policy change. Eyeballing ministers, writing to senior civil servants, encouraging them to encourage the system to adopt open policies in learning materials, just as they've already adopted open policies around public research. You can find all of this on the internet. It might be worth having a look at the EdTech Startup Guide to Open Education. That paper unashamedly aimed at the technologists that can make it happen, but also the policy makers that need to understand at a macro level, at government level, at meso level, at policy level within an institution, to drive the changes, to give us the environment I think that we all want, that environment where we as professionals and our learners can collaborate and share things. You'll see there, speaking my co-founder of Open Scotland, Lorna Campbell of Edinburgh University, and it's worth having a look at what Edinburgh University is doing in this space, and I'll give you some references at the end on that. Yeah. Alt is more than just a university organisation. My background is vocational colleges. I'm currently, and I'll chat a bit about that, I'm currently the head of the Centre for Technical and Vocational Education in a very large Scottish vocational college. Alt reaches out across the sectors. So it's me learning from the technicians that work in the university system, but equally learning from colleagues that work in the GLAM sector. we have good links to the libraries, galleries, and museum sector. Equally learning from the school sector. And again, here's some samples of some of the work that we do. Pictured there is Josie Wales. Josie Wales in the school sector in Leicestershire did an amazing piece of work to get the school system to open up and to get school teachers sharing learning materials. We also work closely with the institutions that have real expertise in this area. And you see in the pictures Maren Deepwell, the chief executive of Alt, and also some of our colleagues from the Open University, and we work closely with the Open University in the UK, but we also work closely with the Open Universities around the world. We've done quite a lot of really interesting work, for instance, with the Open University of the Netherlands, who I think share the same passion that we have for opening up and democratising learning and education. I suppose at the heart of all the things that we do, we really value education as a public good. something that's open to all. And that sits very well with the Scottish tradition of learning too. But what we've got the power to do now is make it more accessible to more people. And we need to lead. If you believe this and you work in the public sector, then we need to lead this charge and not let somebody else do it for us, or let it be done unto us by governments. We need to take control of this agenda, and ALT really helps us do that in the UK. So OER, Open Educational Resources, and how we change the agenda there is very central to what ALT's been doing over the last few years. Now I want to jump to the other end. I want to quite quickly tell you about my day job, because it's great to talk about all of the big changes up here and all the great events that I get to. But what's it like back in a college? So I suppose every institution will have something like this. The vehicle that we are using to drive culture forward in City of Glasgow College is called City Learning 4.0, and we've got a logo, and we've got policies, and we've got all of these things. But what does it mean to students and staff? We're, all these nice things. It's about industry, it's about learning and teaching, it's about access, equality and inclusion. You'll get all of these slides and all of this stuff once I sit down. It's a Google, it's a shared doc. I'll share it with you. You can add other bits and pieces. But I just wanted you to see what it's like, what the targets are that I've got around industry, learning and teaching, equalities and inclusion. And when it boils down to it, I'm being asked with my team, and I look after the library and the digital collections team. I look after the learning technology and the team that supports that across the college. I also look after the team that supports the professional training of teachers that work in further education. I'm being asked to get our curriculum, 25% of that's to be blended and online. And I've got all the, here's a glimpse. I mean, in this, the building is absolutely amazing. I've got the latest technology. It's a big new build college in the centre of Glasgow. Like I said, the biggest vocational college in Scotland. It's jaw-droppingly good as a learning environment. I've got all the tools. I've got a Moodle. I use Bahara as my e-portfolio system. We've got a plagiarism checker, turn it in. We use OneFile, which is because we do a lot of apprenticeships, so I've got to have a special system for managing apprenticeships. If any of my staff are watching me just now, they'll be sniggering because for the last 2 days I've actually been firing emails back and forward because our Moodle and our Turnitin integration hasn't been working very well because all the staff are all trying to get all their marking done at the end of term. So when I've been going back to my hotel room, I've been firing messages back and forth, trying to make it work. But that's the reality. We're all trying to make all of this work for our learners all the time. It doesn't matter what the big policy messages are. The bit that changes things, and the bit that ALT is good for, is actually me being able to sit down and either chat or send an email or send an email out to a group of people who are coping with the same challenges as me, and very often they'll come back with a solution or the answers that I need to fix something. And I've done all the things. Since I've arrived, we've got a super digital library. It now includes references to all the open textbooks that are out there, which is really good. But the harder bit is getting the academics and the teachers and the learners to find these things and adopt them and embed them in their teaching and learning. You can see the high level things that I'm doing. You'll get all of this. Things we're picking up in Scotland, we have to use the good things that are out there and partner with people to bring things in. So we've just done the box at the top, the JISC Digital Capabilities Survey has allowed me to benchmark my academic staff and my support staff, because we're all in this together. It's not just academic staff, it's allowed me to benchmark academic and support staff as to where we are with digital capability. And we're going to use that then to drive further forward workshops and things. Not at staff, with them. We have to bring staff with us. It's not about telling people they have to do things, it's showing them how it helps them. We're part of the Blended Learning Consortium, which is not open actually, but it's a partnership of colleges that are sharing learning materials, so it speeds up the quality of learning materials that we can give to our students. And with my own team, well, we're trying to do all of these sexy things of while trying to fix people's courses in Moodle, also showing them the next generation of stuff, which is AR and VR and all of these things. While I've been here, on Monday we were doing whole college staff development, and I had Google Education actually beaming in a live cast to speak to all my staff at the college. And the reason I'm talking to Google is because the Google suite of tools actually gives learners that suite of tools that allows them to do collaborative learning. It allows them to have their own e-portfolio. And the other thing we're doing, I was interested in the conversation about blockchain, is I've got live discussions going on just now around how we can link a learner's portfolio to the blockchain and to the national awarding body, so that it's not the certificate, it's not the bit of paper that floats about through the system, it's actually us validating the learner's work. Because how we're going to differentiate people in the future isn't about all of the degrees that everybody leaves university with, or the certificates that everybody leaves a college with. Employers and learners are individuals. We need to have a look, and we need to prize that individuality and allow them to take their portfolio. This is me, and this is me here in my kilt, my Creative Commons top on. We're all individuals. At the moment, the system is still trying to give all of the learners effectively the same kind of certification, which makes it very difficult for employers to see which candidates stand out. And how they're going to stand out is really that portfolio of their own work, not just the certificate. How much longer? Okay, 2 minutes, that's fine. Okay, and all of this mapped to educators' pedagogic competencies. Now, really, finally, in the last 2 minutes, an invitation. The OER 18 conference program has been running, I think, since, it's been running for the last 10 years. I was at the first one in Cambridge University. It's worth tuning into. Last year we talked about Creative Commons, we talked about Wikimedia and the impact on learning. We had great sessions from an organisation called, and their logo is there, Reclaim Hosting, which actually solved me some problems. Reclaim Hosting offers a service which allows you to have and manage multiple WordPress blogs without having to do it all within the institutional server. And again, if you're interested in WordPress, and you can see the benefits that WordPress blogs give your learners, or your staff indeed, on reflective professional blogs, one of the hurdles is often that bit of managing sets of WordPress blogs, and Reclaim Hosting gets you around all of that. So OER 18 or OER conference series is very much about that macro policy stuff, but also about that micro stuff about how you can fix things. It's the keynotes from last year that very much reflect that agenda. Lorna Campbell from Edinburgh University, David Wiley giving us a global perspective on things. And you'll find all the proceedings and all the blogs and things and the links that I'll share with you. And here's the invitation part. And it's probably a bit of that Celtic connection as well. We've never taken this conference out of the UK. Next year it's going to be in Galway, Ireland. So I invite you all to that. And I invite you all to join us, if you can, in Manchester this year in September for the broader Alt Conference.
Thank you.
And I'll shut up then. Thank you.
Thank you.
My accent wasn't too thick, was it?
No,
That's why I always remember.
So nice.
Thank you.
So before we start the discussion, I just need to give you some important information for tonight, for those who have dinner tickets to visit the aquarium. So the meeting point 20-30 minutes of guided visit, and then we'll have a cocktail for about 45 minutes, and then dinner for sure, all together at this wonderful place that is the Aquarium of Genova that will welcome us. So we have some minutes, about 15 minutes for questions and discussions. Is there anyone from the audience who want to? There's one here immediately. Then I have some also.
I'm Toril Slotto from the Norwegian Education Association.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah. I have a question to Anthony. I think you said that blockchain technology will disrupt or automate education administration. So my question is, what about teaching and learning? How is that going to be affected by blockchain technology?
Maybe you can. I can see the other microphone. There was another one. Anyway.
Okay, very short version. It's not. Blockchain is a database technology. It works well on things that run with databases. A small thing to note is that universities in the UK now employ more administrators than educators, for example. So the link directly to everyday teaching in the classroom, simply enough, is allowing to let the tech take care of the automation and let teachers concentrate on actually doing the teaching.
Okay. Other question? There was one there. Please. There's one over there, and then Tom here.
Hi, I have a question for Anthony as well. I'm Tracy from MIT. So as you mentioned, the increasing number of vendors now are developing platforms for blockchain-based credentials. So some are completely open source and some are open with permissions. So this is a question for you. So from an institutional point of view, should we work with outside vendors or should we work with our peers to develop our own open source? What are the advantages and disadvantages?
Okay, first of all, excellent question. If you ask my personal favorite is I think that especially universities are perfectly capable to run their own blockchain network and issue credentials on their own network. That said, I'm not necessarily for or against private involvement as long as you're looking at what would be called an open blockchain network. And an open blockchain network, put very simply, would be something that is open source, that does not require an intermediary to verify the transactions, and thirdly, that would be vendor neutral. That can be done by the private sector. Most implementations do not, though.
from Wambik from the International Training Center of the ILO. Anthony, I have also a question for you. One of my friends, he got remarried through the blockchain. And thanks to your presentation, I'm going to phone him that it is immutable right now. So, which was different with his previous wedding contract. Now, a serious question. If you look at the whole blockchain movement and how, let's say, parties like banks, like consultancies were the first ones to invest seriously in it, probably because also they were going to lose power, because third parties, they provide the expertise, whether it's in banking, whether it's in applying certificates, they have something to lose. Through a decentralized network, you don't control anymore and you give it up to the network. So also here, with relation to education, is there not also a reaction of big institutions that can say we have something very much to lose because certification is linked to the prestige of our university, and which now will completely be in a decentralized way? So is this also giving a little bit back to our power to some unseen or unforeseen territories? And what is your position on this?
The way I look at it is, I mean, we can talk about decentralization as an abstract concept, but it really depends who do you decentralize to. Now, at the moment, we have a choice between basically two options. One, each institution issues their own credentials completely independently as a single institution, or we subcontract it all to a company or maybe to some sort of foundation. And I always argue that the reason we don't have proper interoperable credentials is that we didn't want to give up that power. But education is by nature decentralized. Everything in higher education is built on the concept of autonomy and decentralization. So if you say that the unit of decentralization or the actors in the decentralization are the institutions themselves, then actually it becomes a tool to empower groups of organizations working in collaboration with each other. And the way I usually argue this is I'm saying this is a way for institutions to respond to the LinkedIns of today, not to be replaced by them.
You said that there's a shared way of making decision to get this sort of certification. The fact that it's so widely shared, doesn't it limit, you know, the actual decision on the attribution of the credential?
Okay, the way to look at this is to look at basically the closest analogy is the structure of a company. So you can set up a blockchain any way you like. You can set up a blockchain and say anyone who has a token has one vote. Just like you'd say every shareholder a vote. You can create different roles. You can have people who will only who will nominate other people to vote for them. You can have a blockchain where you say anyone can use the blockchain, but for example, for your credentials, let's make this specific, where only universities may issue, 5 other universities have to verify that it's real, and all users can see all of it and can use those credentials. So then it's all a matter of the architecture of the chain you put in the different roles.
So this is important, I think. Are there other questions for Anthony, and then we move to other? So there, Irina. Irina first, and okay. No. Or it's the same.
Hi, my name is Sandra Churi from the University of London, and my question is for Alan. Thank you, first of all, for the thought-provoking talk and quite scary talk about the future of open universities. The one thing I wanted to pick up on is you mentioned the disconnect between higher-level university administration policies and the operational level policies, basically, that make the real difference. And I wondered if you have any ideas how we can make that change. So there is a gap where the vice chancellors actually know what's happening, they know the threats, they know the changing environment. They're also aware of, for instance, poor retention levels, and yet the policies in place do not go far enough to address what's happening at the ground. Do you have any ideas?
Well, thank you for the question. First of all, it's a really interesting exercise to go around and read the mission statements of open universities around the world. And I recommend you do that. They are very varied, they are often very ambitious, and in too many cases they work primarily at the level of rhetoric. And my observation was that, and the observation came from this report from the Commonwealth also, that actually when you look for university programs which are supposed to deliver on their mission intentions, they don't exist. Now what you do about that is going to be around the micropolitics. If we stick with the Meso, Macro theme that Eden has set us, it's around the micropolitics of institutions to a considerable extent, although I think there's evidence around the world that increasingly governments are asking difficult questions of open universities and saying, where is your achievement? But at the micro level, that is, it is around governance as to how you challenge whether the mission needs to be rewritten or whether the program of activities need to be rewritten. Secondly, on the issue of retention, the first thing to say is that the more you open higher education, the more risks you are taking. So while the University of Cambridge may have a retention rate of 99% per year, that's frankly not difficult to achieve when you have such a highly selective entrance system. When the Open University UK has a completely open entry system, so it's radical. There are no necessary qualifications to join as a bachelor's degree in the Open University in the UK. Clearly your outputs are going to be very different, and that's something to be proud of, not to be ashamed of. While of course you must pay attention to how you support students and all the changes that are possible through personalised approaches to student support today. So the issue remains one of close attention, but I think it relates also to how I believe the quality agenda is a contested agenda, and all too often we acquiesce in the definition of equality which dominates in our societies, whereas I believe we need to fight for a definition of quality which acknowledges the more flexible and inclusive approaches that many in this room would want to support.
Actually, these are not my questions, but observations from social networks that I've been following during your presentations. So there are three observations. I will state them very quickly for three people so that you can respond. So for Joe, your conference is on OER. The presentation is on open education. So people are hesitant whether they should be contributing with OER topic or in broader terms. For Timo, in your classification table of non-formal, informal, and formal learning, the categories were very interesting, and the one with libraries specifically. So I understand that the concept that you present about documented learning differs a little bit from traditional, if I may say so, digital credentialization. So do you think digital badges apply to the category of documented or recognized non-formal learning, and do you think libraries might be issuing them? And the third observation regarding Anthony's speech, also in social networks, was you mainly advocate blockchain in education. But what are still critical observations that you have in terms of immaturity of blockchain? And also maybe there are some critical aspects that still need to be considered before mainstreaming of the idea.
I'm not sure. I'm not really 100% sure of the question. Round the community that we have for the Association of Learning Technology, what we try and encourage everybody to be is that open practitioner, and it's taking time to get everybody there. And actually, very often, it's not things that, because the world is changing so quickly, it's perhaps often not sharing an academic paper. Sometimes it's sharing policy or a couple of PowerPoints or even just a slide that gives an institutional vision that has worked somewhere else that other people can borrow and then use, but shared with an appropriate open license, so obviously the originator gets proper attribution, because that's important too.
I think the role of the libraries or the museums and the CLAM sector is probably growing. And now I'm get back to what I say or I could make it this way, that you remember late Eric Duval was saying years back related to metadata that the forms should disappear. And they have disappeared. We don't need to fill up any metadata forms anymore. That's all automated. So we get from the location, from the contextual things, we get the metadata nowadays. And that's a good thing. I think that when it comes to let's say, recognizing learning or portfolios, those should disappear as well. That we can transfer that to artificial intelligence in a way, the patches as well. So we just have a track what you have done. You visit the museum, you went to the lecture, you were watching a documentary movie, and all that will be recorded and becomes part of your portfolio or part of your degree, which you can then share with others. You can choose what do you share as well from there too. So visiting museums becomes something which is recorded and stays in your CV or whatever we want to call it. And what did you do in there actually? If you attend a workshop or you did something in there, everything, all that documentation will be automated.
Okay, so critiques of blockchain and how young the technology is. Now, first of all, in terms of critiques, remember that blockchain is a technology. Just like a knife is neither inherently good or bad, nor is blockchain inherently good or bad. And I would argue that the biggest threat to blockchain at the moment is that due to its complexity, the sheer number of bad actors out there is mind-boggling. Of the ICOs, which are investment funds for blockchain, in the last year, some stats say 25% of them were pure frauds. So the truth is there is a lot of bad actors out there trying to make a quick buck, and unless you're a blockchain expert, it's quite hard to actually distinguish between one and the other. The other bit though, on the youngness of technology, this is why I think it's most exciting in education. Somewhere in the last 25 years, universities who more or less invented the internet gave up the leadership of this to Amazon, to Facebook, to Netflix. And when did it become the job of these companies to run the values of the digital age? Blockchain, because it's consensus-based, because it looks a lot more the way educations get, is maybe a chance to get a bit of power back and to actually decide for ourselves what we want the next generation of the internet to look at.
I think there's one question there, and it might be the last one, I think. Please.
I don't know if I can speak English, but I try. In the brain that we have, you have designed in, I think it misses creativity, and the creativity is in the art, in the sport. You find creativity everywhere, so everything can increase creativity. And the creativity, the ideas are the thing that you carry out, that carry on the world. So I think that the first important thing for a teacher, university teacher, a teacher in general, is carry out from students their creativity. And so I think, I don't know, in blended learning it's good, but you have to help children, students, and everyone to use their mind and help their mind not only with digital learning, but also helping them in classroom, in activities with other people.
Okay.
So it's important. I don't know if MOOC is really a good thing. It needs something human.
Okay. So
important, something with emotion, with I don't know. My English is not good, and it's important to have the contact with people.
Yeah. So I think the journey that we're on actually makes, and let's just focus on the assessment process, it makes all of this much more creative. You know, because often where we are just now, everything narrows down in lots of subjects, not all subject areas, but everything narrows down to quite tight rubrics where learners have to write essays or do multiple MCQs or do all of these kind of things. Now we can have a dialogue with our learners about using a whole suite of other things. They can use imagery, they can use YouTube, they can use, they can create, they can collaborate and co-create around how they want to meet the learning outcomes. And I think increasingly, as we wikify and we do other things, I think there's a next bit which is actually negotiating around the learning outcomes themselves. So I think we can really be a lot more creative in the system, and a lot of these tools are going to allow us to do that too.
So I think we can end this keynote session, which was very, very interesting and lively, as you might have seen. And I thank you all. I think there's a coffee break now. Don't forget the information I gave you for tonight, and enjoy the rest of the conference with us.